So this video is going to talk about what is arguably the most complicated part of this model, at least perceived to be. And that's the concept of local capacity. And so we're going to focus on three things. We're going to focus on the calculated local capacity and how we get there. We're going to talk about real revenue and what that calculation is. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on the discounting concept to real revenue. So to start, Mike, let's talk about how do we get to the calculated local capacity target?
Okay, so up here on the board we have a pretty good set of numbers that we can work from. So we're always going to start with EAV for any district, because EAV is obviously the measure of local wealth. EAV is actually on a 3-year average within the model, so it's not just your current EAV, it's the average of the 3 years. Unless you're experiencing a greater than 10% decline in EAV, then the most recent year would be utilized. The beauty of that is that it tries to catch a district that's really falling out in terms of its local support for any reason or another. So EAV is where we start. Here what we've done is an example. So this is the adequacy target, and we talked about 26 elements multiplied together to get to an adequacy target. We're going to say this district has an example of a $20 million adequacy target. We're also going to make an assumption that this district has about $100 million in EAV. So that's its wealth. The way that we calculate then is we say, what is the portion or the ratio of adequacy target to EAV? And you can see that's pretty easily calculated here at 0.20. Now the complicated part of that starts now once we have this number, because we need this number from all 852 districts in order to make this work. Because the next step is to take all 852 ratios and put them together into a normal distribution, which kicks out basically a 1 through 100 proportionality, which we use as a percentage then of local support. That's where it gets a little bit complicated. But we're going to just make an assumption here that let's say that this 0.20 ratio calculates into a local capacity target of 25%. Now this is just an example. It might be greater or lower, but let's just say it ended up being 25%. What that simply means then is that this district is responsible for 25% of their local adequacy target through local means, and that would be $5 million in local property taxes. That's the ideal contribution from that district, and we call it the local capacity target.
Okay, so Mike, this becomes the calculated local capacity. So this is just indifferent to tax rates, indifferent to anything else, just comparing every district to every other district in the state of Illinois. And in ideal circumstances, this district, assuming all these numbers were right and everything, this district would be responsible for $5 million of the $20 million they need to meet their adequacy target.
That's correct.
Okay, so we just finished the calculated local capacity target. The second phase of this now is real revenue. So Mike, when we get to the concept of real revenue, how do we get there? What's entailed in the calculation of real revenue for our school districts?
So real revenue, and the reason real revenue is on the table is that many districts have more revenue in the stream supporting their kids than what the local capacity target calls for. Remember, the local capacity target is the ideal. So we recognize a portion of real revenue, and I'm going to kind of talk about how we calculate real revenue, and then we'll look at an example. So again, we start with EAV. The EAV that a district has access to at the local level. And we look at their operating tax rate. Now, the operating tax rate that's utilized within the model includes the rate that exists for education fund, O&M, lease, special education, and IMRF Social Security. So just as an example, we're going to say that in this particular district, that's a $4.20 tax rate. Now, the big piece is not in this, two of them. One is bond and interest, because those are outside of the model. Those are funded, through, other kinds of means. And the other one is transportation. And transportation is not in the model, And so it had to be subtracted out of the operating tax rate. Now, the method that's used for that might seem a little bit complicated, but it's not the actual tax rate for transportation that you might see on your levy sheet or something from your county clerk. It's actually a calculated rate. It's the value of this: your actual expenses in transportation from the prior year minus your state reimbursement, and then divided into your EAV to create an equivalent rate. And that's subtracted from your overall operating tax rate in order to be more accurate. Part of the reason we need to do that is that in tax cap districts, there was no limit on the transportation fund tax rate. And so districts that might have hit the top of their education rate or their O&M rate by statute had levied additional resources in transportation and did year-end transfers and so forth. And by the way, one side benefit of the law as it was passed is for tax cap districts, we eliminated the fund cap for the education fund. So now we won't have to have those sort of strange transportation rates going into the future. That's just a very, very nice added benefit. So transportation is out. And essentially then you do the calculation. So you have your overall EAV, you calculate it times this adjusted operating tax rate, and that tells you what you're actually getting at the local level. That's your real receipts or your real revenue. In this particular case, using our district example from before, $4.20 tax rate times $100 million in EAV ends up at $4.2 million in total local property tax dollars that are coming into that district. Now, if you recall the last board that we had up, we said in that example that district was responsible for $5 million. So there's a gap. There's a gap between what the ideal tax support is for that district's students and what they're actually getting in real revenue. Over the next 10 years, that's going to need to be a conversation probably at this district level. Is there a way for them to increase that local share? Now, the opposite might be true for districts that have a greater result here than what that local capacity target was in the original screen. In that case, there are real receipts above the local capacity target. And a portion of those real receipts are going to be utilized in the calculation of wealth in the formula, but not all of them. And we're going to demonstrate that one next.
So let me ask a couple questions, Mike. So a couple things I think that are important through this. Taxable EAV. There were a lot of conversations about TIFs and some of those nuances through this legislative process. So this is only what I have access to. So if I've lost EAV into a TIF, that doesn't count against me. It's only what I have access to.
Right. And it's important, I think, and this is important for us as educators to be communicating accurately on TIF as well, because as you know, when a TIF district is established, it has a base EAV. That base EAV, when it's established, is your EAV.
Right.
You always have access to that. But the incremental growth of that EAV over time is not taxable for you. You can't get to it, and so that's not included in any of our model. And there were a lot of misconceptions over how TIF districts worked, even to the point of people saying, communities are hiding money in a TIF district. Well, not necessarily. The base EAV is still there. It didn't change from the day that TIF was created. Nothing was taken away or hidden. But that increment could be very valuable in some scenarios.
Particularly for taxing bodies like school districts.
Right.
The other question I had then, so when we see the word adjusted operating tax rate, the adjustment is really around transportation.
Absolutely.
Okay.
What you're seeing at the very top on the left-hand side is our previous calculation where a local capacity target of $5 million exceeded the real revenue in that district of $4.2 million. In that case, then the LCT dollars are actually what is used in the formula. But the what if has to do with the inverse. If the actual real receipts exceed the local capacity, how do we deal with that particular issue? And so on the right-hand side, then we have a simple calculation that we utilize. It starts with calculating the difference between those real receipts and the local capacity target, or the LCT. In this example that we're using, we have a calculated LCT of 4.2 million and real revenue or real receipts of 5 million. So the difference is $800,000. That $800,000 will not all be utilized in the formula, but a portion of it will. And the way we determine that portion is to multiply that $800,000 times the local capacity percentage. That percentage was determined, and we talked about this previously, through the whole process of 852 ratios being put through a normal distribution and assigned a percentage. So in this example, we're going to use 60%. 60% is actually above the median, and so this district would be above the average wealth per pupil in the state of Illinois. So in this case, then we take the $800,000, multiply it times 60%, and we come to $480,000 of real revenue above the local capacity target that will be utilized for wealth in the formula. So we just do that basic math, 4.2 million plus $480,000, and the result is $4,680,000. So we began with an LCT that was less than the real receipts of 4.2 million, real receipts of 5 million. We ended up with $4,680,000 utilized in the formula for the wealth of this district.
Okay. All right, so we've got a calculated number, we've got a real receipts number, and then the number that we actually use, which is where the discounting effect comes in. No question, this is the most complicated piece of this solution process, and it's going to require some questions.
I think once districts start to see the report of that original local capacity target, they'll kind of understand what their ideal position is in terms of local support. The rest of the calculation is going to be related to that.
Okay.
If I'm below, if I'm above, and there are obviously some local policy conversations that can happen. I don't think those are going to happen in year one, but by the time we get comfortable with how this works, there are going to be much more opportunities for rich dialogue at the local level as to what is our responsibility to fund that adequacy target versus the state's responsibility.
And this is clearly the area where people are going to have a lot of questions.
I agree.
All right. Thank you.